Okay, welcome everybody. Let's get the speaker view going. Yeah, I'll start by saying I sent all of the grades for the midterms. I think it was Sunday, late Sunday afternoon, 5, certainly before 6. But I did have an issue I needed to mention. I've actually mentioned it several times before. A handful of people in all my classes, not just this one, seem to ignore it when I say, if you don't send me any of your assignments, whatever paper, exams, or your extra credit submissions, uh, with the email handle that matches your name in my roster, problem, because then I don't always have access. Usually I don't have access to finding out. I could take 10 or 15 minutes to go search and find an old email from someone early in the semester who used a different handle or someone else's email. So unless it's literally physically impossible, I'm asking anyone who's done that. And I did address that when I returned at least 2 or 3 exams out of the ones that I've graded for the midterms. Just please in the future try not. So if you didn't get a grade, I think by now everyone has, though. Actually, sorry, my mind slipped a gear. It's almost the same exam, but the other class I teach in the evening is the late starting one, actually. So you should have gotten your grades back. Oh, here, sorry, let me get Serena in there. Sorry about that. Welcome. We were just talking about the loose ends. It's apply to most people in this class anyway. That if you didn't get your midterm grade back or any other responses to any emails, it's probably because a few people still are using someone else's email or some other weird handle that I have no idea how to parse that and match it with the name of the person on my roster. So it needs to be sent with a clear indication that that email address is the one that matches the name on your registration. That's all I'm saying. So
Wasn't the name the name is supposed to be in the subject of the email?
uh, that helps a lot if you're not able to, but using someone else's email or coming up with a funny fancy name, isn't there some rule? Well, I don't know. There should be at the JC not to do that, because that causes problems for all of us. I mean, it could take, and if I had half a dozen students doing that, I'd be wasting 2 hours of or an hour and a half anyway, looking up there, what does monkey man mean? Who's that? So it's a problem if it isn't the actual email handle itself. It's a good question. I'm glad you brought that up. It doesn't match or even look like it's part of, including your actual full last name at least, and maybe first initial. Because of course, Santa Rosa JC, I can email you from the Outlook, the campus website, almost everybody, by just putting in just like with all faculty, you can email anybody on our faculty this way too. You know this, right? Or any administrator. It's a system-wide system. Campus and not campus, a college-wide system, a district system, which is the first initial of your of your first name, your full last name at santarosa.edu. So that's my default. And when I do that and it bounces back mailer demon, dead end, I just give up and move on to the next person. I don't think that applies to too many people in this class. Now I think about it, it's more my evening classes that I have that issue with. But if by chance anybody here didn't get yet any particular grade or confirmation, I always confirm when I get extra credit on the day I log it in. I don't necessarily see it the same day you send it, but certainly within a couple of days or so. I check my email 6 days a week. The one day I take off is Saturday. That's family day. But over the weekend, I get back by Sunday night if you sent me something Friday evening or over the weekend. Anyway, the point is, I think most people now have your grades, right? Because if there's anybody who doesn't have any particular grade that they submitted, then they need to send me an individual email. And then, of course, in the body of that email, you'll explain, my name is this full, first and last name, R2.1, whatever. And this is the assignment I didn't get back the grade for. Then I can hit reply, of course. But that's an extra step for both of us that hopefully could be avoided if you just have an email address that either is the one from Santa Rosa JC, which I'm pretty sure you had to use to enroll. At least that's what I was told by other instructors, which would be, like I said, the system-wide method of first initial of your first name, full last name at santarosa.edu, but that doesn't always work. Whereas if you have an individual email, that's your business. That's fine. I'm happy to respond. But if it doesn't even remotely relate, Monkey Man is one. I love that. I get several of those. I've had them probably every semester since the pandemic and Zoom teaching started. Okay, that's nice. You call yourself that, fine, but I don't know who you are. And it takes a lot longer than it should to look that up and match that handle with the name. So if there's any way to make sure, if it applies to any of you, and it doesn't to most of you, perhaps none of you today, but by this point in the semester, that you might have submitted something, or in the future you've still got your second paper and the final exams, and you want those grades, of course, or any extra credit confirmations. Just make sure you can, if possible, use an email handle that has your full name in it. And if not, then I guess at least in the tagline, that'll give me a shorter time frame to search out what email it is when I return them. Because see, the assignments, when they're graded, don't always have the email on them. It depends on which reader I'm working with, but even if they all did that, still sometimes that doesn't help. So enough on that, enough. But this is a chance, as always, at the start of each of these classes, these Zoom lectures, to ask any questions you have about grades or about your second papers. I think most of you by now should be thinking of what you want to write about. Let's confirm the deadline for that, which is April 20th. So you've got, a little bit of time. You've got a little over 2 weeks, but you don't want to wait till the week before it's due to even start thinking about it. I would hope by now, or sometime in the next few days, you will pick a topic and start doing the research. That's the path to getting a good grade. Also, I noticed nobody yet has, let me just double check. I have the roster here. I'm not going to read out any actual numbers from anybody's, individual names at all, but just to take a look. 1 or 2 people have 20 points, but nobody else has most people don't even have 5 points of extra credit. Of course, if you know you're doing well and you don't feel you need it, that's fine. So obviously it's a totally optional, exercise if you want to do extra credit. Okay, so let me see. I'm just double checking if there's anything other than today's topic, which we'll get started with in just a moment, that I didn't think to mention. Let me think. There was something, and I think it had to do with, it has something to do. Oh yeah, there's a very relevant to today's topic, a new, now I don't have it memorized. I should have written it down. Arabic Muslim Heritage Month, I think it is, or maybe just a week. I can't remember. That one of the campus groups, the faculty members have either put together or starting to. How timely could that be? This is Ramadan. If you didn't know, some of you, right? That's the holy month for Muslims all over the world, which might as well segue. But before I do that, into my background, as I always give you a start, for each new topic of historical context. Before we do that, any other questions that are on anyone's mind about grading, extra credit? Okay, again, at the end, if you think of something, I will stick around as I always do. Okay, so what can we do in just a couple of minutes to set the historical context about Islam? We'll start with the fact that it's actually one of the world's newest religions. That may sound strange, but Judaism is the oldest organized religion. It's over 6,000 years old. Christianity is, depending on whether you consider, the death of Jesus as the starting for that or not. But anyway, in that generation, when some of his followers went out and started talking about this new concept of their former preachers teaching, he was of course Jewish, that everybody does, right? And he didn't say he was Christian when he died. He didn't say that was his followers. But anyway, the point is that loosely at first and then more formally organized religion goes back to 1,000 years. Buddhism, I think we covered this. So if we didn't, that's right. This 2.1, you guys we don't get into that. Buddhism, if you take 1.1, we do talk about it. And it's really a very fascinating kind of concept. Is it a religion? Is it organized? Well, but adherents, people who say they describe, it's called self-describing followers, is about 2,500 years old. And then Hinduism is even older. Hinduism is about 4,000 years old. Islam, by comparison, started in the early 7th century, a little after 600, when Muhammad was already a mature adult and had already had, a family and, a life. And he was actually a warrior, if some of you know this, but that wasn't all he was, of course. But the point is that he had his revelations in the early 600s. That's the 7th century, which is the time we covered last week when the Byzantine Empire was at its height, in its golden age. So in the midst of this expansion of Christianity throughout the Middle East, North Africa, all around Southern Europe, the Mediterranean, everywhere that the Byzantines conquered, a man named Muhammad was born in the Arabian Peninsula, and the rest, as they say, is history. Obviously, he was a uniquely inspiring prophet, as he was called then, and today is, of course, that there's only one God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. However, they also, some of you know this, they also have high respect for Moses and Jesus as earlier sort of partial prophets. They didn't use that phrase, but there is some kind of respect. I've been through, let's see, half a dozen Muslim majorities, I always say it now, I guess I would used to say Muslim countries, and spent time in people's homes, so visiting their shops, going to mosques, traveling with people from that culture, not in a bubble on a tourist bus, but with individual people, residents of those countries. Jordan, Syria, I call it Palestine, the West Bank, and Gaza, although they're not part of the same now. They're ruled by different groups. Egypt, right? And Turkey. And in every one of those countries, there was this constantly, what can I say, reaffirming, that's the word I'm looking for, thread of core beliefs that the majority of the people had about respect for life, and belief, of course, in a one God. That's why it's a monotheistic religion. There are three major ones: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Islam is, some people will be surprised. Well, let me just ask this. I do this when I taught in person. I do it with a chalkboard, or the whiteboard, whatever. Before I wrote the numbers down, what the latest surveys by the United Nations, not any one religion, because then they would be biased about having bigger numbers for their group than they might really have. But when you take an independent survey, and they're done every couple of years at least, by the World Council on Religions, totally non-denominational, not a partisan or biased group, or the UN Council on Religion, I think they call it. So they pretty much track with each other. Anybody know what the world's largest organized religion is in terms of people who describe themselves as adherents? Anybody? It surprises many people when they assume they know, because obviously we're working on a topic that's one of those. I just said one of the three. I didn't say it was one of the three largest, though. One of the three monotheistic religions. Anybody have any guess as to what is the world's largest organized religion? Nobody has even a surprise. Hang on, my throat's a little parched. It's not Islam. Many people assume that. I'm surprised nobody said that, or one or two people didn't chime in with that. It's understandable, because it obviously has such a presence in world media now, and of course for all kinds of other reasons. Historically, we're going to see that how much they've left Islamic culture, which the things created or invented by Muslims, is pretty impressive. We're going to go into that in just a couple minutes. Okay, so the world's largest religion in terms of adherence is Christianity. Now, Islam's going faster. And so when you look at the numbers, most reasonable, independent, again, I'm not writing this down, so just give you the numbers verbally. It's about 2.7 billion Christians, because some people forget that Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, they're basically Christian. They believe the same basic concepts that the other more mainstream branches do. And there's a 1.33 billion Catholics alone. So about half of all Christians are Catholic, but the Protestants, about 750 million. And then people forget Eastern Orthodox, right? We covered that somewhat last week, the whole Greek Orthodox / Byzantine, Russian Orthodox, et cetera, all the different permutations, but under the overall category, that's about 500 million people. So you add that up, it's about 2.7 billion. Now, most people now round out the number for Islam at about 2 billion. It's pretty close, 1.9, somewhere between that and 2 billion. So there's somewhere around 750 million more Christians. However, at the rate Islam is growing in terms of the populations in the countries that adhere, that subscribe to Islam, they'll probably surpass Christianity in it. Well, certainly within a generation. Anybody know where Judaism falls? Surprises a lot of people, unless you're Jewish. Maybe you know this. I just have so many Jewish friends. I don't have to guess, but I could look it up, and I just did, in fact, right before this lecture. Barely 20 million in the entire world, of which roughly a third live in the US and another third in Israel. So, okay, there's a little context though. So Islam comes out of the Arabic or Arabian Peninsula in the early 600s under Muhammad, and he did conquer, literally. He was a warrior as well as a prophet, and he spread Islam at first just in the area that today we call the Arabian Peninsula. And then when he died, his followers spread it all the way across North Africa, all the way up to almost half of Turkey before his sons, I think it was, their grandsons, spread that. That's pretty fast, pretty rapid growth. It obviously had an appeal to people who had been under the Byzantines, nominally under Christian rule before, for 100 plus years. So let's get started with our first must-know slide. And this is one of those, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, is so important it won't be cut from the study list, A, and B, it has a high possibility, if not a probability, of being on the final. Okay, so this is the first must know for today. Dome of the Rock, just like it sounds, 4 words. Dome of the Rock, Jerusalem. I'll spell that in case you haven't written that word recently. The location is Jerusalem, 691. Again, none of these dates have to say AD or CE, common era, whatever, because they all are after, the what common era to common to what, the birth of Jesus. That's just a convenient peg, right? Time frame peg to use for the world to have consistent ways of measuring what year we're in. So we say common era, obviously, and that's what we mean. So this is the second oldest mosque in the world. Here are the facts that are really important about it. The second oldest mosque in the world and the third holiest site in all of Islam, or to all Muslims, if you prefer saying it that way. I'll say again, that makes it pretty important, right? It is the second oldest mosque in the world and the third holiest site to Muslims. The only 2 holier sites are in Saudi Arabia, which are Mecca and Medina, the 2 holiest cities of Islam. So this mosque is a World Heritage Site. You would guess it would be, right? It's in the middle of what is now, at least the way it's being administered, the Jewish capital of the Jewish state of Israel. So it's in an area which is almost entirely dominated by Israel itself, the government, the country, and Jewish citizens, of Israel. But there are, some of you know this, 20% of Israelis are Arabic, and most of them are not Jewish. Very few of them are. Some of them are Christian, but most of them are Muslim. And they are allowed to worship here. So it's not that it's not accessible at all, but there are restrictions. This is all part of the meaning. What causes some of the conflicts, like if you have to write this, but when Gaza, that thing was about a year ago, wasn't it? When there was missiles going from Gaza into Israel and Israeli bombing raids over Gaza, that was rather tragic for both sides. Of course, well, it got started over riots around this building. So this building, in other words, here's what you should write. The site of this building causes conflicts between 2 of the world's major religions, Judaism and Islam. It's inevitable. Why? Not just is it in the middle, of course, it's in the middle of Jerusalem. As I just said, it's the capital of the modern nation of Israel. But it's on top of the ruins of the Jewish temple, the Temple of Jerusalem. the one we saw, remember, with the Arch of Titus, when they sacked Jerusalem, the Roman soldiers, just under 2,000 years ago, almost 2,000 years ago, and they destroyed the temple. They left one section of it standing, which is called the Temple Mount. So it's like all the rubble from the walls that had collapsed, and whatever was inside the temple was packed into a square. That's what you're looking at. Whoops, let me get that closer here, this area. And then one side of the temple, one wall was left standing, and that's where Jews pray now. And it's all part of the meaning of this slide, because here we are at the third holiest site in Islam, which rests on the ruins of the holiest site to Jews. You're supposed to go to Israel once if you can make it in your lifetime, if you're a devout Jew, and pray by the Wailing Wall. You've heard that phrase, many of you, right? The Wailing Wall, where Jews often pray about the loss of their temple. You see it on the news quite often. Jews standing by this wall that's about 40, 50 feet high. And then on top of it is this mosque on just, out of sight. Of course, it's in the middle of this plaza. So once again, I'll summarize it, that the location of this mosque, which is on top of the ruins of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, causes inevitable, I don't see any other word for it, inevitable conflicts between two major religions, Judaism and Islam. Jews allow, because they control the access, the government of Israel, or just say Israel, let's say Israel, controls the access to the mosque. And most of the time, people are allowed to worship freely, but there are times when they feel there's some risk, some security threat, or they just, whatever the reason, they might decide it's too risky. They will restrict the access for Muslim residents. Well, they don't always live in Israel. Some of them come from outside Israel to worship here because it's such a holy site. And when that happens, that leads to tension, confrontation, and often violence. So you see what happens after an empire of 2,000 years ago took over this area and then divided up the population the way they did. But the thing I want to emphasize is, why is it called the Dome of the Rock? And the wonderfully positive story behind that is the other half of the meaning, or part of the meaning. It's called the Dome of the Rock because this mosque rests over a giant boulder. When you say rock, it's like something you can pick up and throw. Oh no, it's huge, it's gigantic. It rests over a giant boulder, which Muslims believe is the site from which Muhammad ascended to heaven on the back of his magic white horse. You can say winged if you just want to say winged horse. Pretty impressive, isn't it? That would make you want to, if you believe the teaching of Islam, you'd want to come here and see it. So once again, it's built over a rock from which Muslims believe Muhammad ascended directly to heaven on the back, he and his horse together, right? In other words, on the back of his white winged horse, or you could just say magic horse, because the horse was supposed to be magic. And they went to heaven from this site. So then a mosque was built over that site several years later, and that's what you're looking at. Now, is this the original building? Well, there's a debate on that. This part of it here, undoubtedly, this part of it, the lower part, let's go take a look now at, hi, oh, did somebody else want to join us here? Let's see, do we have, admit, yeah. Okay, yeah, good timing. We're just doing the first slide here. Let me get that out of the way, of Islamic architecture and the Dome of the Rock. I already mentioned what it is, so I'm not going to repeat that, but you still can get more information about the other part of the meeting, and then I'll do a formal analysis. So this is the Dome of the Rock, how it would look if you were standing in front of it, but let's see another view. I actually like this slide better, so if it's on the exam, I'll probably use this slide because it's a clearer, more sharp image. So there are several things about the mosque itself, besides what I just told you about why it's called the Dome of the Rock, which I've been inside this mosque at least twice, maybe 3 or 4 times. I'm trying to remember. Every time I've been in Israel, I've stayed usually with Israeli citizens, but I also stayed with an Arabic family once on the West Bank. So I've been inside the mosque during, it's open to the public, by the way, not only to Muslim worshipers. And so it's a museum. It's an historic landmark. It's a World Heritage Site. That obviously makes it one of the most important structures. There's only a few hundred of those. The UN designates sites that are so important to world history that they put them on a list called the World Heritage List. And that's what this is. Okay, so what are the other things about it that mark it as unique? Well, first of all, there's no minaret. Now, there's your first definition for this week's lecture topic. The first definition, a minaret. Okay, so did I not put that on here? If I didn't, I should have. Well, I'm going to tell you what a minaret is because it's part of the meaning of this slide. So I guess I gave you a break. I do alter these listed terms to know sometimes. Minaret is a tall, narrow, round prayer tower. A tall, narrow, round prayer tower, comma, at or near the corner of a mosque. Where you can see this doesn't have one. Well, that marks it as really rare. I mean, it's almost unique. I've been to dozens of mosques all over the world, or wherever the countries I've been to, wherever, and that includes in Paris and London, and many in the US. And I haven't seen any other mosque that didn't have a minaret. So this is extremely rare. It's such an early mosque, the design of it, and perhaps they just didn't yet think of putting up a prayer tower, which would, of course, in most mosques be right here, right? Or on this side. Some mosques have more than one minaret. We'll see some of those as we go through the slides in the next two lectures. So that's the first fact about it. Makes it unique, or nearly unique. There's hardly any other mosques that don't have a minaret. Another fact is that it has, there we go. This is the view I'll show you, because now you can see the details here. It has three features that are common to all mosques. Okay, so this doesn't make it unique. I should have said the dome is gold. Okay, there's your second unique feature. That should be obvious. Let's lower this. The dome, it's real gold. It's not solid gold. Nothing would stand. Gold is the softest metal there is. So you don't build things out of gold. I think some people think that. It's gold plated, gold covered, however you want to say it. And that's redone about every 20 years. Different Arabic governments pay to re-gild. That's the only word to do that, to replace the gold. Is called gilding. So they re-gild, or restore, if you prefer, the gold on the dome. Different Arabic governments take turns. I'm sure they just agree among each other whose turn it is next to pay, because it's expensive. Right, there's a lot of gold. So that is not typical. Most mosques don't have gold domes. In fact, very few, if any. But the three features that are common to all mosques, and here's the last part of the meaning now for this slide, are all present here. One of them is no living creatures, or no images. I'm sorry, I should say, I'll repeat that. No images of living creatures anywhere. It's against Islam. Some of you know this, right? It's against the teachings of Islam. Only God can do that. Allah is allowed to have that. Images like that if he chose to, but you never put them on a mosque. No mosque I've ever seen or read about has had any living creatures, human or animal or divine. None. It's against their religious beliefs. So you don't see any of those. The second thing that's common to all mosques is prayers in Arabic. And there they are, right there across the top of the wall. Usually that's where they are, the very top part. In decorative tile work, you could write that if you want to be that specific, but you could just say some decorative detailing includes one of the other. There are three things common to all mosques, as I mentioned. And the first one, obviously, no living creatures, no images of any living creatures. Second is Islamic prayers in Arabic. And third is geometric patterns such as plant motifs. That's instead of living creatures in decorative tile work. They're almost always on tile work. On the facade, of course, we're talking about the exterior, obviously. So the third feature this has plenty of is geometric decorative patterns. I think these are vines. I haven't been to the mosque in many, many years, to this particular mosque, but it could be just pure geometry, it could be plant motifs, or both. That's acceptable. Okay, so that's pretty much the whole meaning on this. But now I do need to mention to you, well, let's do the formal analysis. And then before we move on to the next slide, I skipped over the uh, things invented by Muslims, and I'll briefly explain what each one is, because that's in your list of terms to know, and that could appear easily, very good possibility. On the true false section, you know now from doing the midterm how that might appear, where I might make a statement based on one of these definitions you have in your notes, right? And I might say things invented by the Muslim include X, Y, and Z. And if any one of them is not correct, then the whole statement is false, right? So we'll do that in a minute. Let's do our formal analysis here. Okay, so it's completely symmetrical, left to right. Of course, unbalanced toward the bottom, obviously with the dome being narrower than the structure below it. Okay, then we have it's warm on the gold of the dome and some of the tile, but most of the facade is a cool blue or white color. The tile work is almost all blue and white. The marble actually here is more gray than it might appear to be, having stood in front of it. But some parts, as you could say, the marble's a mix. Yeah, it's a mixture of light brown or even tan. You could say tan, which is relatively warm, and cool gray on the lower part of the wall. Okay, and then we have the rhythm, of course, obviously these columns supporting the entryway here, and the pointed arches, one of the things the Muslims invented. We'll get to that in just a couple minutes when I describe the features on the list of things they invented. They invented pointed arches. Not the French. Most people think that the French did because they invented Gothic cathedrals, but that first appears, the pointed arch, on Islamic architecture. So that creates rhythm, as do the columns and the decorative tile work. It is dynamic on the dome and the drum. Remember, that's a drum, right? It's resting on the drum, round section. That's all dynamic. The pointed arch windows are, but the walls, most of the facade, in other words, is stable, of course. The modeling is just the shadows created from the natural sunlight. There's no technique for modeling. Here the line is painted. Tiles, decorative detailing on tiles is always painted, right, before the tile is fired. So those are painted lines. So here we have, I don't see any carved lines. It's all painted lines on the exterior decorations. The largest mass is, well, you just have to say the outer walls. I don't think you really would break that down. And then the dome, and then third would be the drum supporting the dome. For space, it's a large open hexagonal, six-sided, you can write either way, hex, right? Agonal or six-sided, large open six-sided room with about a 60-foot tall dome. You can look straight up to see the dome from the floor. So that's how the space is used. And then we have, let's see, texture. The textures here is the real smooth texture of marble, tile, and gold. There really isn't any similar texture. Here you can't see the plant motif, so you don't have to write about that. Okay, and I think I mentioned balanced, yeah, rhythm, pretty much covered everything. Okay, so let's do this briefly before we move on to the second must know. Just a brief explanation of the list. You should have that near the top of the page we're on for the list of terms to know for this week. Things invented by Muslims. Universities. Now, I would think that might surprise at least a few of you. It does most of the time when I do in-person classes when we go over this kind of a list. Wait a minute, didn't the Romans and maybe even the Greeks have universities? No. What, not when we consider what is it really the definition of university, and that would mean a single institution of learning. I used to say all the different branches of knowledge at that time in that culture under one roof. Well, you can't say that because it's not possible. You can't just do one building where everybody teaches it the same. So the right way to say that, if you want to know what a university is, it's not a definition by itself, okay? It's not standalone. So I'm just giving a context. So you don't have to write this part. But universities, that is a single institution where all the branches of knowledge from that culture at that time are taught by experts, and students come together to learn different branches of knowledge. That concept first appeared in the Western world. Now, in China, they had universities going way back, but In the Western world, they didn't appear in Greece and Rome. They had academies, an academy for the arts, or maybe for the visual arts, another one for performing arts. Well, we still have those today. Engineering, and architecture maybe, but not all under one, umbrella, if you want to put it that way, in one location. That concept first appears in the Western world in early Islamic cities, like in Arabia and in Spain, when the Spanish were conquered by the Muslims. We'll get to that in a few more slides. So universities are a Muslim invention, at least for the Western world. Street lighting, again, didn't the Romans have them? Yeah, yes and no. But if you walk down the streets of Pompeii, one of their most wealthy cities, or Rome itself, it depends on what neighborhood you were in, neighborhood. And the street lighting was not maintained by the central city government or municipal authorities. It was the neighborhoods that paid for their own lighting if they were middle class or upper class. Poor neighborhoods, little or no lighting. So the idea of a city government, municipal, that's the right word, a municipal, right, authority, being responsible for lighting and maintaining street lighting on every street of every city, that concept first appears in the Arabian Peninsula in the early 8th century. By the 700s, they were already doing that in Muslim cities. Higher algebra, again, the Greeks definitely had algebra, and the Romans, of course, basically learned the same concepts from Greek teachers. So algebra existed before a Muslim religion was created, but higher algebra, the kind that's harder to pass, that it was for me when I had to take it twice in high school, and my daughter as well. That level, the higher, more advanced level of algebraic equations, that was first, again, scholars in universities in Muslim cities created that level of algebra. Reflecting pools, we're going to see the evidence of that. There's no need to describe what a reflecting pool is, I hope, but if it's not obvious, you'll see it with one of the slides. The Taj Mahal, actually, we won't get to that till probably on Wednesday. So reflecting pools, in front of buildings, of course. That concept first was created by Muslims. And then pointed arches, like I said, here you see them right here on a building that is, 600, 700, almost 14 centuries old, not quite. Okay, now let's go to the next must know. This is another one I won't cut from the study list. I'm not saying it has as high a probability of being on the final as the first one, which is a very high probability, but it's not going to be removed when we do the review, right? And we cut the study list down. It'll stay on that list. Okay, so this is the Great Mosque at Isfahan. Oops, no, not Isfahan, I'm all right. Cordoba, there's another one coming up with that. Great Mosque at Cordoba, Cordoba. Mosque, I think everybody knows, right? Mosque. Great Mosque of Cordoba. In the location of the country, of course, it's a city in Spain, and the date is 786. So this bears a little historic context, because otherwise, if you don't know this part of history, see, I have no idea what they teach in world history anymore. I know when my daughter took it several years ago in middle school, some of this stuff was still being taught. That Spain was invaded by the Moors, and we're talking about the culture, not the marshland in northern England. Moors, the Moorish. It was a tribe, really, it was. The Moorish tribes, Islamic tribes in North Africa. Look how close they are. They almost touch, right? The tip of North Africa and southern Spain are just a few miles apart. So they invaded Spain. You don't have to know when, but for those who might care, in 711, easy number to remember, right? You can just say in the 8th century or 700s, they invaded Spain and quickly conquered all of Spain. So the Muslims ruled. Here's the way to say who were the Moors. It's part of the meaning for this. You should take the note. The meaning for this slide is that it was built by the Moors after they conquered almost all of Spain. And then they ruled most or parts or much of, you say most or much of Spain for nearly 7 centuries. In fact, no, nearly 8. Yeah, from 711 to 1492, the year Columbus sailed and I won't say the ocean. That's a different thing we used to learn in grade school. This, in other words, culture is a major impact on European history, particularly on Spanish history, because they ruled parts or most of Spain for almost 800 years. So of course they left a mark on Spain. But there's several things about the Moors that are really amazing. They introduced universities on European soil. The first European universities were not in Italy. The oldest Christian ones were. They were in Moorish Spain. So the first universities ever created in Europe were by the Moors in their kingdom of Moorish kingdom of Spain. The second fact about them is that they introduced Islamic architectural features. We've covered a little bit of that, but this is different. Now we're looking at the interior of the largest mosque in what was their capital city. I'll say it again. This is the interior, the main prayer room. So that's really the best way to write, the main prayer room in the largest mosque in the capital city of Moorish Spain, the kingdom, they call it the Moorish kingdom of Spain. And it has the features that all mosques have inside, including the first one we just saw, the one in Jerusalem. So that leads to the second definition on the list of terms from this week. Mirab and Qibla. Now, those are written out, so I should have to spell them right there below the list of things invented by Muslims. Mirab and Qibla. Okay, what are those? Well, that's not too long a definition. Mirab is the niche in the wall of a mosque. And if you get up close, you can just see the closer view. Just see there. That's a niche in the wall of a mosque. That's a mihrab, which points in the direction of Mecca. I think most everyone knows Mecca is the way you face when you pray, right? If you've ever seen anything on the news, read anything, or know anybody is, or all the above, you know, Muslims are meant or required, not supposed to, they're required to face in the direction of Mecca. Well, how do you know where that is if you're inside a mosque with no windows? Mosques don't have windows, by the way. I mean, sometimes they do up way up high, but you're not supposed to look out at the landscape that's distracting you from your prayer. So when you're inside a building, a mosque, specifically a mosque, and there are no windows, how do you know which direction to face Mecca? Because of the mihrab. You look for the niche in the wall. And the Qibla, the two words have to be used in tandem. They don't make sense without. The mihrab points you in the direction of Qibla. Qibla is the Arab word for the direction to pray, or Mecca. You're facing the holiest city in Islam when you pray. And how do you know where it is? With that niche. So the mihrab points you in the direction of Qibla, in other words. So the two go together. So this is what you're looking at down the end of that long row of columns, is the mihrab and the direction Qibla, or facing towards Mecca when you're praying. Okay, the other facts about the meaning of this is that it's very specifically North African Islamic architecture, because it has two features that were invented by North African Muslims, not ones in Arabia or Turkey or the other parts of the Muslim empire, or empires. They were separate empires, actually. The Arabic world, okay, which would be, by the way, Moors were Arabic, if that isn't obvious. North Africa, it's all Arabic. I've had some people say Egyptians or Arabs. It depends on where you want to draw the line, but as of Muhammad and the time he conquered them, and from then on, and they spoke Arabic and they pray in Arabic. Yes, all of North Africa is Arabic, as is the Arabic Peninsula up to about the edge of, well, Israel, obviously, and Turkey isn't. Okay, so these are North African Muslim details. The horseshoe arch, if you look carefully, you can see how it curves back inward like a horseshoe, right? That literally is an invention of North African Muslims. I used to say Moors, but it turns out there are other groups of North Africans that use that horseshoe-shaped arch. You can see even more clearly here, right, how it curves back in. And then the candy striping. I mean, that is the right word. Red and white stripes. I remember my daughter saw this slide in my classroom when she was 4 or 5. She came to visit with me once. Said, candy canes. Is that what they want people to think of? Well, it's just a color pattern. It's a very, very lively pattern, visually stimulating. And it's true of almost all North African and Moorish mosques, that they have a red and white stripe pattern. You can just say candy cane or candy striping, if you prefer, on their arches. And then the third thing, the last thing that makes this a North African style of mosque is the piggyback arches. See, this arch is inside the bigger arch. You see, if you look closely, and you can see that here too. One arch helps support the one above it. The one below supports the one above. Those are called piggyback arches, and they make it much stronger. This is a massive building. I have only seen it from the outside. It wasn't open when I was passing through Cordoba. I had just a short layover. I've seen several mosques in Spain. They're fantastic. They were the wealthiest. The Moors were the wealthiest of all the Muslim kingdoms in their early, years, and so they built some of the most magnificent mosques. And this is one of those. It's now a museum. It's not a functioning mosque anymore. And so the piggyback, I'll say again, the three things that mark this North African Muslim style mosque: the candy strapping on the arches, the horseshoe shape of the arches, and the piggyback method of one arch above another. The final fact about the meaning is these columns. These columns were brought from ruined Roman temples. Not all of them, but many, just say many of those marble columns were recycled, you could say, or reused. I mean, that's the accurate phrase you could use. And that shows, the kind of historical, right, cycling, if you want to say, or, kind of recurring techniques that even today, that's quite common among environmentally sensitive architects like Jeannie Gang, the top architect in America. I'm hoping to get a contract to write a book about her. No one has. She's the most prominent woman architect in the world, out of Chicago, my hometown. Her buildings are in every major city in the US and Western Europe and parts of Asia. She does recycling of materials. She was trained that way in the 90s. Green design was a new thing then. Well, here we're doing it thousands of years ago. Well, pretty much almost 1,500 years ago. So the Moorish architects of this mosque recycled these old Roman columns. Okay, that's pretty much the whole meaning. But when I say main prayer room, if it's not obvious, you're looking at just one tiny portion of a room that could hold up to 5,000 people. That's a big prayer room, right? One of the biggest in the Muslim world. Some cathedrals can hold that many people. Some Gothic churches, we'll see those later on this semester. Some even bigger, 10,000. But this is one of the biggest mosques in the world. Okay, formal analysis. Is it balanced? Well, yeah. If you drew the line here and you're just looking at, the overall scene that this photo captures, you'd have to say it's balanced left to right. And to me, the ceiling and the floor are the same width. So I think it's balanced top to bottom as well. But there are people who say because of the arches and the curved stonework on the ceiling, between each group of columns, that there's more mass on the ceiling than the floor because it's flat. If you see it that way, that's fine. Then you could say it's unbalanced toward the top. The rhythm should be very clear here, of course, with each of the horseshoe-shaped arches, the candy striping on the arches and the columns. It's dynamic on the arches and, of course, stable on the columns. Well, they're round, so they're both, I guess, stable and dynamic. And the floor, of course, is stable. So it's a mixture. I mentioned space, the real dimensions I didn't give you actually, though, so let me do that. This is one large open room that can hold up to 5,000 people at a time with about 15-foot high ceilings. It's not very tall, is it? Only 15 feet high. It's nowhere near as tall as the ceilings in many mosques or churches. So it's rather low ceiling. And then we have the colors, almost all cool on the floor, the columns, right? And the ceiling. But of course, the red striping on the arches is warm. But then obviously that's just half of the color on each arch. The other half is a cool white. It's mostly cool colors in this room. The textures, the real smooth texture of marble and the real rough texture of stone on the floors and the arches and the ceiling. So no cement textures, mostly rough textures except for the marble on the columns. There is modeling here, but it's of course the shadows formed by the sunlight, and the shadows are deepest in the niche again because that's where you're supposed to look, and it's easier to see if it's carved. It would be, a couple of feet at least into the wall there, that mihrab. So that's where the strongest modeling is, and it's always that way in a mosque. So it's natural modeling created by the sunlight. The lines here are visual lines. There's no carved lines, and these are not painted lines. They're, formed by the colors of the bricks. There's no line as outlined. So it's all visual lines around the arches and the corners or edges of the walls, right? The largest mass, probably the ceiling, because it does have these curved, stone arches in addition to the floor. But you could also make the case that the floor is a single mass because it goes all the way from one end of the room to the other, and the ceiling is broken up by these arches. So you decide if you see it that way, then it would be the floor. Would be the floor that is nice of them to warn me. Yeah, this came out and I didn't even notice it. There we go. We're back. Sorry, just plugged it in. That the ceiling is the larger mass if you look at it as a single structure. But I see it as the floor is the largest mass. And then each of the sections between the columns on the ceiling, and then the arches, since they're double arches. And last would be the columns. Okay, I think we covered everything here. Balance, rhythm, yeah. All right, let's move on. We're doing well on time here. Now, I decided to alter the order because it's more logical to have two great mosques back to back. Even though if you look at your syllabus, the great mosque at Isfahan, I'll spell that for you, is near the bottom of this list, which would mean we wouldn't get to it until Wednesday. But I'm putting it here because it's more logical to have it in this, context next to, or right after, I should say, the other great mosque we saw in Cordoba. So this one, again, is second from the bottom on your list, but I'll spell the only word on here that I think you might need me to spell for you. Great mosque, and you can say at or in, it doesn't matter which you can say, or of. I've said this before, in prepositions, you don't get points off. If you choose to use a different preposition, I hope you all know what a preposition is, right? Then, in, at, on, in, of, they all have the same basic function. It's the main words you need to have correctly spelled, and that's great. Mosque, of course, is M-O-S-Q-U-E. In Isfahan, it's the last word in the title. Isfahan is spelled I-S-F-A-H-A-N, one word, I-S-F-A-H-A-N, Isfahan. It's a city in Iran. Iran, not Iraq, don't mix them up. I know it's easy to do that. Iraq is the country America invaded several years ago. Iran is what some people call Persia. If you actually wrote Persia, I'd give you credit because that's the other acceptable name today for this same country. The date 1300. So what are we looking at here? Well, first of all, the word great mosque I already defined, but again, if you didn't write it, or in case this is on the test by itself without the other slide, you wouldn't want to mention what that means. The phrase great mosque means the largest and most important mosque in any given city. That's what the great mosque of Cordoba was, because that was their capital, the Muslim Moorish capital, Moorish Spain. So this is the largest and most important mosque in one of the holiest cities in all of Iran, okay, or Persia. It's to this day one of the most important holy centers in Persia or Iran. And this mosque has a reflecting pool. That's what we're looking at in this slide. You can see from the, of course, reflection of the building itself. That is a feature invented by Muslims. But even more specifically, so you should add this in your notes, it was invented by Persian architects. That was first used anywhere on Earth, reflecting, well, at least in the Western world. You have to qualify that because I'm not sure if there were reflecting pools in China earlier than this. There might have been, but not that I've been all over southern China. the oldest part of China is the southern part. The cities in the north of China are much newer. Beijing's not an old city. It's only 600 years old. That's not old in Asia. Guangzhou used to be called Canton. That city's 2,000 years old. But I never saw reflecting pools anywhere in my travels in China. But let's just say in the Western world, the oldest reflecting pools were in Persia. They invented them. And of course, they were Muslim by this time. They had been for centuries Muslim. So Muslim architects in Persia invented the reflecting pool. The pointed arch had been invented much earlier in Arabia. And there's another Muslim invention, right? You can see it right there on all of the arches are pointed. And then we have the fact that, remember, this is part of the meaning of the Dome of the Rock, but you should write it for the notes on this slide too, obviously. Part of the meaning is that there are no living creatures anywhere on this mosque, inside or out, the interior or the exterior. So let's get another close view. What we do see here are plants, flowers, and vines. So plant motifs, you just keep it simple, say plant, you don't have to say flowers. Sometimes they have flowers, sometimes they just have vines. So plant motifs and geometric patterns are what are allowed in Islamic architecture. And then the prayers in Arabic here are not that easy to see because there they are. You see where my arrow is, or this cursor? You'd have to get up close to see them. And if you're standing underneath this big open point entryway here, the biggest arch, you could read those prayers. And I'm pretty sure they all say the same thing. There is no God but Allah, right? And Muhammad is his prophet. It's usually what they say, but you don't have to write that specific. Just say they're Arabic, Islamic prayers in Arabic. But let's get back to the reflecting pool. The reflecting pool is marble. And it does have in it, in the reflection, a double image, if you want to put it that way, of what's missing from this mosque. Minarets again. Wait a minute. Didn't I just say that the one in Jerusalem was one of the few mosques without a minaret, designed that way? Yes, that's still true. There were minarets on the edges or corners, at the corners of this mosque, but they were destroyed in an earthquake hundreds of years ago. You have to know when. I think it's like 1500s. Anyway, just say sometime after the mosque had been built and opened, a large earthquake. If some of you know this, Iran is subject to really big earthquakes. It can kill like 30, 40,000 people at a time. I have friends from there, by the way. Luckily, their families weren't made homeless by their most recent earthquake that killed, was it at 40,000 people? It was a good 10 years ago. So what you have is a mosque originally built with minarets, probably one at each corner. And now instead they were replaced with a prayer room. But I have had a number of students, no one perhaps in today's group here, and any of you might think this, but look carefully at the motif on that prayer room. It looks like two crosses above each other, Christian crosses. Of course, that's not what we're looking at here. It's just the ironic similarity in the decorative detailing or tile decorative panels and the tile work. So just say that there's a prayer room resting on top of the entryway. Now it replaced what was once originally two minarets. Now I had slides up, but I couldn't find them when I searched for this slide on the internet. The other side of this courtyard has the same shape and all the features that I just told you, but there the minarets are still standing. So somehow the minarets on one side survived the earthquake and on the other side they did. So you can just say it still has at least one, it's either one or two minarets that are only visible on the other side of the courtyard. But I think this view is better to explain that. You know, these things often happen, and when a building gets major damage, it isn't always rebuilt. Now I have to make a quick aside. I hope that they don't destroy the most beautiful cathedral in Ukraine. The Russians seem to be aiming for it last month anyway. The one in the center of Kiev. It's one of the oldest Greek, Byzantine, Eastern Orthodox churches in the world. It's from the 900s. It's a real thing. It's not a replica. It's irreplaceable. So far, it survived the shelling of Kiev. Anyway, so what we have here is nothing to do with the war or riot or anything, human caused. It was an earthquake. Okay, and then we have the last part of the meeting is, what are these? These are prayer rooms for individual worship. if a family lost a loved one or they sought guidance. I'm not saying it's the same thing as a confession box in a Catholic church, not that directly similar, but it has some vague similarity to the concept. Almost every religion has some aspect of that, or else, why would people, right, seek whatever information if they want to and they adhere to that religion? They can come and use these prayer rooms at different times, and maybe small groups, of course, of young students of Islam, of course, grade school or teenager would learn about the Quran. So these prayer rooms are used for both teaching and actual prayer, individual or small group prayer services. So those are the prayer rooms, and this is the main entrance. Okay, and it's one of the most magnificent mosques. I've seen slides. I've never been to Iran, but slides of the interior. But for the exam, if it's on exam, you'll just have this view. Okay, so let's do our formal analysis. It's balanced, totally symmetrical, left to right. Almost every mosque I've seen is. But of course, it's unbalanced toward the bottom because of the width here, right, of the wings. They go quite a bit of ways beyond the edge of this slide here. They go for many more sections. The prayer rooms go way, way off to the right and left. So that would make it unbalanced toward the bottom, of course. The color is almost all cool, except for the bottom of the walls here. There's a little bit of yellow tile, but it's minimal, mostly just around the top. So it's almost all blue and white or cool colors. And then the marble, black marble, that is the basin, right? The lining, if you want to call it, for the reflecting pool, that's neutral. And of course, the only other warm thing would be the woodwork on the prayer tower. Was the tile on the roof of it is blue and white. It's cool, of course. The textures here there are some similar textures on the plant motifs around the arch mostly. You could just say it that way, or inside the arch as well. But it's hard to see them. So you could just say there's some similar texture on the upper part of the tile decorations. Most of it is the real smooth texture of the tile and the real smooth texture of marble on the reflecting pool. And then this, I believe, is also marble, the bottom of the walls here. So that's all real texture. And then there is only one bit of rough texture, and that's the wood of the walls of the prayer tower. And then it's dynamic on the pointed arches and pretty much stable on everything else. The walls, the patterns of the decorations, well, they at least are framed by straight lines. So it's mostly stable on the walls and dynamic, of course, in all the arches. For space, it's the real space, of course, is a large open prayer room, if you walk through that doorway, with a 60-foot high dome inside. And that's below the little prayer room, where the imam would climb up, right, and sing the prayers, right, each day, 5 times a day. Now they probably broadcast it by loudspeaker, but originally it would have been the actual voice of the imam calling out prayer from, first the minarets, and then when they were knocked down by the earthquake, from this room. So you would just have to say that this is a large open main prayer room, you could say it that way, with about a 60-foot high dome, and then surrounded by smaller prayer rooms with about 15-foot high ceilings. So that's the real dimensions. Largest mass is the entryway. It should be fairly obvious here, right? And then the second largest mass you could say it's a reflecting pool. Actually, if you count the reflecting pool, it's not really part of the mosque per se, but it's part of the complex, the design of the courtyard. So I guess you could say first the reflecting pool because it's quite large. Then the entry section. It's called a pavilion. That's the right word in architecture for any section of a building, but you can just say section. And then each the wings with the prayer rooms. In this photo, of course, they don't go as far as they would if you were looking at it in real life. So you could just say, in this view, the second largest mass is the entry section, and then the prayer room the wings of the prayer rooms. Okay, the colors I already mentioned. See, line, there is painted line. Yeah, I forgot to say, and visual both. The visual line is, of course, created by the shadows. The modeling is, again, natural modeling from the sunlight. Creates these deep recessed looking niches, shows the depth of them, and there's no technique for modeling. It's just the natural sunlight shadows, right? And then let's see, the line is painted on the tile work and visual around the arches. Okay, balanced, stable, dynamic. I think we've covered everything. Textures, modeling. All right. I'm trying to decide if we should try to do this. Now, let me see. Okay, hang on. I'm going to go forward and see where we're at. I think I'm going to save those. Yeah, let's do it this way. This will be the first slide we'll see on Wednesday. It's one I'm not cutting from the study list, I'll tell you that. And then the only other one, just so you know, so I'm bookending it, will be the last one, the Taj Mahal. Now, this one is a very high possibility or probability of being on either the slide ID or slide essay part of the final. And then this one won't. Again, it's important enough that I guarantee it won't be cut from the study list. But rather than rush through it, and I definitely can't do it in 6 minutes. I don't want to run late because I usually stick around as always for questions if you have any. Let's just do this. Let's do one other thing. I'm looking at the list of terms to know, and actually you guys get a break. I did say I took one already, said I took one definition and a minaret off the list. And I've already covered this list of 5 things invented by Muslims and Mihrab and Qibla. So if you joined late, 1 or 2 people did, you want to watch the video of this for sure, which will be posted by, should be posted by 8 p.m., usually sooner than that on Friday. Okay, so let's pause here now, and I'll go back to speaker view. Okay, stop share, and I'll just take any questions you may have. Does anybody have any questions about anything we just covered, or the extra credit options or grades or anything in general? Now, as usual.
Could you define apps again? I don't know if you
Sure.
were.
Oh, yeah. I know. I was thinking about that. I know I did, but it was toward the end of a very crowded lecture, I think. Sure. Apps is, in case the rest of you listening want to make sure you have that definition. It's at the top of the same page as the Muslim terms. An apse, APSE, right? An apse is a semicircular, I'll say it once slowly, and then repeat it. A semicircular extension along the outer wall of a church, comma, which helps support that wall, period. I'll say again, it's a semicircular extension along the outer wall of a church. So not about mosque, right? It's a Christian concept, comma, which helps support that wall. We saw those with the Church of, well, let me just mention in case it's not obvious where that applied, what slides it applied to. Last week's slides, of course, on the Church of San Vitale and on the Hagia Sophia, which is a very, very important slide. There's a very strong probability of that'll be on the final. We saw examples of an apse from the outside on the slide of San Vitale. If you haven't seen that lecture, you're going to watch it for review. And then the interior views of apses, very big ones on the inside of the now mosque again, the Hagia Sophia. By the way, it was in the news, or at least it was in the Chronicle and on one of the CNN. Ramadan, the holy month, right? For somewhere that you fast if you're a devout Muslim, from sunrise to sunset for 30 days. That's a long time. There was a photo in the Chronicle and at least one live shot of people worshiping in Hagia Sophia, which is now called, quote, the Grand Mosque of Istanbul, because it wasn't built as a mosque. And for a whole century, it was not any kind of religious structure. It was a museum open to everyone around the world. And now it's only being used as a mosque. And so if you went to Istanbul, I think you could go on a guided tour with a certain prearranged time frame, but you couldn't just walk in anymore because it's a mosque, so you'd have to be going to worship. Okay, so any other questions about anything else relating to what we covered again, or any other things about grades or extra credit options? Like I said,
So mosques aren't public?
sorry, go ahead.
Mosques aren't public, but the other church was. So
Uh,
at some
that's
point
a
I could.
good question. I've walked into the ones in Paris and London and didn't have to have an appointment with my then either Muslim, Jewish, or both together. That wasn't an issue. But in some places, it's more restricted. I think
Yeah,
that's
my
the best.
sister was in she went to like the Hassan Mosque or something in it's like Northern Africa. I don't know exactly the place. Morocco, I think. And she
Morocco, yeah.
like kind of her friends spoke like Arabic and stuff, so she kind of like smuggled her in.
Well, some of you saw my slides of the right inside of the Hagia Sophia when it was open when I was there. It was just a World Heritage Site at a museum for over almost 100 years. When the Turkish government became a secular government, it's fast becoming more, dominated by a fundamentalist Islamic. Well, the guy that runs it is basically a dictator, Erdogan. He's become that. He didn't start out that way, but that's happened. This is the same thing with Putin. Putin was actually he was appointed first, then he got actually elected the first time. And he liked that power. So he's never had an honest, open, free election since. He's had fake elections where no one's running but him and some, fake, straw candidates that are basically supporters of his already. So they haven't had democracy in Russia for about 20 years. And so, yeah, now Moscow, depends on where you go. So as far as I know, the one now in Istanbul, the Hagia Sophia, that's become Moscow, and you couldn't just walk in. You'd have to go during prayer. And of course, if you're respectful, then I don't think they'd mind that any more than they did when I went with my then girlfriend to the Blue Mosque in Istanbul during a hurricane. As I mentioned with the slides, I showed you my own photos of Istanbul. So most mosques would welcome you, as long as you're respectful. But you want to go during the middle of a prayer service, that they might not want you to interrupt. But some mosques are more restricted, and depending on the city, I guess, and the government that runs them. Okay, these are all good questions. Any other questions about extra credit? Like I said, nobody's got more than 20 points. So if any of you think you might want to just give yourself a cushion or margin for error, you might want to consider the fact that you have up to 60 points, or if you're one of those who's already done 20, there's only a couple, you still could get even up to 40 more points of extra credit between now and final exams week.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
Could you just redefine minaret one more time?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, a minaret is a tall, narrow, round prayer tower at or near the corner of a mosque. A tall, I'll say it again, tall, narrow, round prayer tower at or near the corner of a mosque. Every one I've seen dozens of mosques with minarets. And the only one I ever saw that didn't was the Dome of the Rock. They never had one. They're always tall, narrow, and round, and they're always within a few feet, if not attached to the corner of a mosque. Usually there's a way for the imam to get in from the mosque, the guy is gonna lead the prayers. So like the head priest at a Catholic is going to climb up some stairs. Back in the original concept, you literally had a live human being go up and call prayer 5 times a day. So they had to be close to, if not directly attached to the mosque they were part of. But now they're not. Many of them, the newer ones aren't. They just use broadcasts. I've seen those in like Amman, Jordan has a whole bunch of amazingly huge mosques. So that's a neat city. I love Amman, the capital of Jordan. There, almost all the minarets are recent. The mosques are fairly recent, like within the last 70 years or less. And yet they have the traditional features, but the minarets are not attached to the mosque and no one climbs up in them. They just broadcast the prayers. But I like the old style ones. There's nothing quite like it. In the morning, sunrise, you're definitely not going to sleep through it. So I'm a night person, but I wasn't when I traveled in Islamic countries with various Islamic hosts and guests and citizens. They'd say, you are going to get up in the morning, whether you want to or not. You're going to hear the prayer, but it's a beautiful way to wake up. If you're in one of those really old villages in Jordan or Syria or Egypt, and you hear morning prayer, it's a very pleasant way to wake up. Better than an alarm clock. Okay, any other questions? Anybody? Now's the time. Okay, one more call, last time for anybody. All right, so again, we're going to cover some pretty important slides, two of which are really not going to be cut from the star list, and that's the Taj Mahal and the Court of Alliance. So you want to be here for the whole lecture on Wednesday. I'll see you then. Okay. All right, you guys, take care.
Yeah. See you Wednesday.
Bye.
Bye-bye.